Guild of New South Wales acknowledges the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we work today and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in the event. We pay our respects to elders past and present of the Aboriginal people and the ongoing cultures and connections to the lands on the water throughout. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dr. Fred Osman. As the President of the Teachers Guild of New South Wales, I would like to thank you for joining us for our Guild Education Series on the topic today, Technology-Enabled Learning in Schools. Where are we now? It is my great pleasure to be joined by a distinguished panel to discuss this important topic more broadly. Our panel this evening includes Professor Matt Bauer, Professor of Learning Technologies, Macquarie University, Dr. Annie Agnew, Academic Lead, Teacher Professional Experience, University of Notre Dame, Dr. Jonathan Mascarella, Director of Learning Innovation, Loreto Kirribilli, Dr. Kimberly Presick-Kilbourne, Deputy Head of Junior School, Wyvern House Prep, Newington College, and Dr. Lauren Nussin from the School of International Studies and Education, University of Technology, Sydney, and the Teachers Guild New South Wales Counsellor who will be moderating this event. Thank you for our panel for joining us today. For some housekeeping, please feel free to share your experiences, thoughts, and questions in the chat function and pose any questions to the panel through the Q&A box on the Zoom control panel. Please keep your Q&A questions short and relevant to the topic on what we are talking about today. Our host will moderate and will tend to ask the questions during our discussion panel. Thank you, Lauren, Matt, Annie, Jonathan, and Kimberly for joining us today.
Thank you, Fred, and welcome everybody. So I'm coming to you this evening from Darug country. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land here as well. So I just wanted to make the point that the rationale for these Zoom sessions is that we are able to bring together a combination of research and practice in the field on the various topics that we present. And of course, we're very aware that we would like to reach people who are not able to join us in Sydney. And so this gives us the opportunity to engage with teachers and school leaders across New South Wales and even beyond those borders. So welcome everybody tonight. So as Fred said, we have a very distinguished panel here to discuss the topic tonight. So I would just like to start by asking everybody just to give an introduction to themselves and their work to sort of guide the questions perhaps and some of the topics that we will introduce tonight. So I might hand over to you, Kimberly, first. You're first on my screen.
Thanks so much, Lauren. My name is Kimberly Presick-Kilbourne. I actually am relatively new to school leadership. I actually have spent the last 20 or so years at UTS working in teacher education, and my PhD was in primary education, looking at how students develop interest in learning in science and technology. And so I actually have been teaching science and technology in the primary degree program at UTS for a long time, but also other subjects as well. And I have a real interest and passion for innovation, especially technology integration in teaching and learning. And I've tried to be innovative in my teaching and learning practice in my teacher education subjects at uni. But now, having returned to a school, I actually came back as a Year 6 teacher at Newington College last year and spent a year as a classroom teacher working in a team of 4 teachers, which was a fantastic experience on returning to school. And then this year I'm working in a deputy position for years 3 to 6. And I've got a team of 14 teachers that I work with, as well as with specialist teachers in our school, and about 350 vibrant, dynamic boys that I work with, them and their families as well, which is a huge privilege. Thanks, Lauren.
Thanks, Kim. Matt, can I ask you to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, and wonderful to be invited to such an interesting event. I'm a professor in the School of Education at Macquarie University. I specialise in the educational technology area, and so part of that is helping to prepare pre-service teachers to use technology effectively when they enter into schools, and also conducting research about the impact of innovative use of technology in education.
Thank you. Jonathan.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm going to echo Matt's thoughts around just brilliant to be here and such a good opportunity to share some thoughts. My background, I suppose, is completely unrelated to technology, and that is I was a qualified chef for some years and worked my way through the vocational industry and vocational education, moving into teaching as part of that sort of transition, and had a personal interest in technology. So self-taught software and sort of hardware engineer, I suppose, and of some sorts throughout my past, and then brought the two together to my current role, which is Director of Innovation at Rhoda Kirribilli. And my work there really revolves around understanding how we can strategically implement best practice with technology, how we can move forward with new technologies and improve both administrational work, but also teaching and learning, in schools. And then coupling that with some action research with teachers in their own areas of technology and understanding their own use of technology. We're looking very closely down the barrel of publishing a chapter around some of the sort of empirical work we've been doing in understanding teacher practice and professional learning. So all focused on how we implement technologies. Thanks.
Thanks, Jonathan. Annie.
Thanks, Lauren. And it's kind of the flip side of Kimberly. I spent a lot of years, many years in school as a teacher, both as a classroom teacher and eventually in lots of leadership roles, including leading pedagogical aspects of technology use in across the school. To academia and to the university area, and did my PhD much later than perhaps many other people on this panel, but which also focused on how young people, pre-adolescents, are using technologies. But I think one of the things I'd love to share is that for me, that whole integration of technology into learning has always been really significant from the moment many years ago when I was fortunate enough to have a digital camera that had a floppy disk. And for those of you who don't know, it's a big square soft thing that went into the camera, and a hot air balloon landed in the playground of our school in Canberra. And I was able to run out, take digital photographs, print them, because of course we didn't have anything to display them on in those days, and do something with the children. And I think that was that moment where I realized that the use of technology could change the nature. Since then, it's just been, one wonderful discovery after another. And we're actually working with some of the other people on this panel at the moment, looking at the concept of digital agency for teachers. So looking forward to this conversation tonight.
Thanks, Annie. Right, well, we might get started then by talking about where we are now and being very mindful of the fact that we have just, well, hopefully we are emerging at the other side of a pandemic which has impacted so significantly on all of our practices in education. So I'm going to put this question to the panel, and I'd like you to feel free to jump in as you will. But I'd like you to think about what technology-enabled learning experiences are you seeing happening in schools, and how much does that have to do with practices and things that happened during COVID, and how much of that is, how much of that do you think is actually going to stay with us if it did come from the COVID experience? So I'm going to ask who would like to jump in on that one, perhaps.
I might jump in from a practical point of view and give you my experience, because I worked at the Rhoda before the COVID pandemic, and a whole lot of things changed structurally for us. And I moved in to pick up a role that sort of forced me into having to think about this problem really quickly. And that was, how are we going to move our teachers to be able to do what they did in the classroom so well, to do it online as well as they could. And we had this mentality that was, we need to build a Morris Minor, not a Rolls Royce while we're doing this. And we sort of kept that at the front of our minds while the teachers were, considering what they were going to do on a day-to-day basis. But throughout our experience of COVID, the teachers just kept pushing the envelope and thinking, how can we do more? How can we do more collaboration? How can we do more critical thinking online? And how can we really get the kids involved in doing that? Because it's I know we know as university educators how hard it is to engage people online and get them talking and doing things. And I can tell you it's just as hard with Year 9, probably even harder with Year 7. And, so but where are we up to now? I think teachers have felt empowered by that experience, because before that, they thought the only way that I can do this is to do it within my scope of understanding or my capacity, or to slowly build those capacities over time and become more confident. Whereas being sort of dropped into it and sort of told, well, you've got 4 weeks, get on it. It sort of went, oh, okay, and that whole sort of shock and awe process gave way to, I think, a feeling of confidence over time. And now what we're looking at in schools at a very practical level is thinking, well, what next? What can we do now with that empowerment of, we know the basic tools, what are the next phases of collaboration and communication in schools? And what technologies are we going to be able to do to use that? MS Teams, interactive panels, multiple interactive panels that can talk to each other, being able to get students to work with VR and XR and other things that teachers wouldn't have been confident enough to sort of use prior, and now are just reaching out to us and saying, I'm ready for that now. I'm confident enough with the basics.
Jonathan, can I ask, do you think that, because whilst that learning curve was steep and high, and you're saying that, people sort of stepped up to it, teachers stepped up to it really, really well. As we're sort of in that, and again, like Lauren, I'll use post-COVID rather loosely, do you feel that sort of capacity has continued to rise and people have kept broadening their scope of understanding about how to now reintegrate technology into, or think that's dropped off a little bit and the technology has now gone perhaps back to maybe what it was a bit pre-COVID?
I think we've accepted a hybrid model. I think what we've done is we've said some of those things that we used with technology were great and we can keep those. But I think teachers still love paper and pen. They still love doing things with students practically. And I think we need to understand that different students learn differently. And we often, assimilate technology with something digital, and it's not always necessarily the case. So I would suggest that a multiple range of hybrid technologies are just as suitable. I wouldn't use the word dipped. I would just say we've branched. We now have these 2 parallel branches of things that we're trying to do, and teachers are trying to find time for both of them while upskilling to get to that next level with the more technical work.
Oh,
thank you, Kimberly. How did your teachers? Did they change their practice during COVID, or did they learn new skills? What was their experience?
That's a great question, because I think one of the things that we realised very early on was what the boys were, we could deliver online and use Zoom, and we had quite a structured sort of day in terms of regular Zoom check-ins and lessons, and then independent time for boys to work. But one of the things that we found was that they missed collaborating with each other, and so finding ways for them to connect and to link. We ended up having sort of some immersions where we would run an incursion for a day. We would run an immersion where the students were given a project-based challenge and then put into teams to be able to create things. So an example of that was we decided that we would give them a scenario that post-COVID, New South Wales tourism was going to be wanting to promote Sydney. And what secrets of Sydney could they promote? So they used their own local areas that they are in. They had their iPads at home, so they went to film content. They developed a little advertising campaign to feature their secrets of Sydney in their local area. And then they had to collaborate to use iMovie to be able to coordinate that. They could have some time then using GarageBand perhaps to be able to create an original soundtrack. And then they had to learn how to upload that to YouTube so that we could have a film festival to share their ads. And so there were lots of innovations, I guess, in the way that teachers thought about how they could use technology, and then different apps, for example, where they might then be able to help students to collaborate. And I think for us, there are things that have definitely continued. We realised that a lot of students liked having Canvas assignments and being able to upload in 3 to 6. And we've also realised that we were really limited in the way we were using Seesaw to create electronic portfolios. So that's been something that is going to be an ongoing project for us.
That's great, because something like Seesaw is used throughout many, many schools and everyone's familiar with it, but it has a lot of affordances that are perhaps not really used to their full extent. So that was probably a good opportunity for everyone to become more familiar with those kinds of apps and quite using digital devices that people have at home. I mean, even if it's a mobile phone, because we did have a question from one of the attendees tonight about using mobile phones. And of course, they have a huge range of affordances to help students engage in this kind of learning, and collaboration, as you say, being the underpinning kind of driver there.
And I think, Lauren, if people are interested in that, Matthew Carney and his colleagues, Kevin Burden is one of his collaborators from the UK. They're doing some really interesting research around use of mobile technologies in classrooms, and they've developed a great framework. So if people are interested in following up, how they can use mobile phones or mobile devices in classrooms to really enhance student learning, I'd recommend looking up Matthew Carney's research with Kevin Burden there.
Yeah, absolutely. So there is a website related to that it's called IPAC, and I will try and find it, or perhaps Annie, you might have that on quick dial. We could put that in the chat, because it's got lots of examples of practice of people using mobile devices to bring the real world into the classroom, to enhance collaboration, and to really personalize learning. So yeah, that's a great example. Matt, you have done lots of research through COVID. I wonder if you could shed some light on what some of the findings that you've had through your research.
Yeah, sure. So we did a study of parents' perspectives of different learning designs that they were seeing come home from school with relation to technology. So it provided a pretty good way, and it was a sort of a national survey, to see the sorts of ways technology was being used. And so during COVID, what parents were reporting is that children were spending maybe 3/4 of an hour using Zoom throughout the day, which really relates to what sort of Kimberly was talking about, that you'd have check-in sessions by teachers. There were still a lot of offline activities and tactile activities, which is good to hear. Students were watching videos, completing online games, reading online resources. But one of the findings that was quite striking coming out of it, because we did sort of ask parents about, how satisfied they were with what was coming home, how difficult it was for children, how stressed they were as parents. And we found this interesting relationship between the amount of digital creativity tasks that were being prescribed and completed throughout the day, and parent satisfaction, and lowering student difficulty, and lowering student stress. And so it was great to hear, Kimberly, that in your school there were a lot of sort of digital creativity tasks where they're creating posters or capturing video data and whatnot, because it's one of those things that when we looked at the quite enormous variance in the ways that different schools were using technology, from absolutely nothing right through to students on Zoom the whole sort of day, that it seems like, based on their satisfaction, that the balanced approach is the way that parents were most satisfied, and also not just using it as a receptive tool, but much more as a platform for enhancing creativity and collaboration.
Wonderful, that's great, Matt, thank you. So all of the contextual factors coming into the whole technology-enabled learning, and particularly through COVID, obviously, playing a huge role. Annie, what about the learners themselves, do you think? Are you aware of a range of experiences? I'm thinking in terms of aspects that people have raised, such as digital divide and those kind of things. Do you think this is a significant issue for us to consider?
Yeah, look, I think that it's going to continue to be an ongoing issue for quite some time, because, where we're fortunate enough to be able to have the skills of the teachers, that are able to be either at a high level or lifted high, and the children have access to, or the people on the other end, whether the children or even adults in learning, that they might respond differently depending on how much access they have to technology. And in fact, just to bring that to attention, just the other day, I was working with someone on a very tiny research study that they've been looking at, where they found that a lot of their students, they were young adult students, but they were wondering why they weren't as engaged as they had thought they would be in the learning activities. And then they realized that almost all of the students, about 95% of them, were actually accessing the learning resources using phones, so not using larger devices. So their ability to interact in the way that it was sort of designed for was the whole experience was very different. And so they've actually been looking at they can adapt for that. And I think that that's probably something that across the board we need to be thinking about, is it's not just what we are creating that is important. It's actually about understanding the user experience. So whether that be the children are having to share a device, or the children are working on limited internet, or the children are working, on a range of devices, I think all of those things are equally as important as the intent of both pedagogically and technologically of what is being produced.
Yeah, that's really important. I'm just wondering if, for those of you in schools, what did you find you needed to provide for the students in addition to the actual devices themselves? Perhaps, Jonathan, I might ask you to come in on that one. Did your students need a lot of support? I mean, were there any difficulties that they encountered? We might have lost Jonathan momentarily. Perhaps Kimberly may have.
So I mean, I'm very fortunate. I'm working in a very well-resourced school, and all of our boys were able to have access to an iPad that the school provides for them at home. So that the device sort of issue, we were in a different situation, I know, to a lot of schools. So that was sort of taken out of the mix. But we actually were quite mindful that I was teaching year 6, so we knew the boys already had fairly good technology skills, and we were usually using with them apps that they were already familiar with, or programs that they already knew, and perhaps we were asking them in a task to use those in a new or different way. So designing a poster using Canva, for example, or Pic Collage, they were already familiar with those apps. Whereas kindergarten to year 2, obviously we were looking quite differently at the way they were able to use technology. And sometimes we were obviously having to provide their caregivers with fairly detailed instructions about how to access different materials. So it did really vary in our K-6 context.
Hey, Jonathan, you're back. Thanks, Kimberly. I wonder, right from the high school perspective, were there any major challenges in supporting the students, or what's your sense of how they did through the COVID remote learning? Yeah, I think we have lost them again. Yeah. Well, I mean, that sort of brings us to one of the questions that is guiding the discussion tonight, and that's looking at the digital literacies that we are hoping our students will graduate from school with. We know that there is a huge need. It's been stated by economists around the world that we do need students to have this level of digital literacy in order to be able to not only participate in the workplace, but also to participate in society more broadly. So I'm wondering whether you have a sense that we are getting to that point. Are we able to support our students to get to that level of digital literacy? Do you think that we actually need them to be at? Perhaps Matt, I wonder if you have any thoughts on this.
Yeah, look, and it might be time
from the high school.
It might be time to get a little bit controversial because, well, in New South Wales, what are the digital literacies that we require students to have achieved? By the time students We have technology that's sort of mandatory through to year 8, but we don't have any sort of digital literacy specific requirements that we sort of assess, other than through the, you know, the subject choices that they might have. And what it leads to, I think, because people have a whole lot of literacies in, you know, using their mobile phones or gaming, but in terms of literacies for learning, what can we assure by the time that, you know, someone leaves school? So I think there's tremendous potential and tremendous unharnessed potential in terms of the digital literacies that we are not necessarily assuring that students have by the time they leave school. But that's to be provocative, and I'd be very interested to hear from other panel members.
Yeah, could I add in there as well that, because I think you're right, Matt, 100%, but I also think in my study that I did on looking at pre-adolescence, one of the, I suppose, came through was that whilst we think as both educators, parents, adults, whatever, that the knowledgeable ones, that, you know, these are the literacies that young people need to have. What we're not looking at is the literacies that they do have. And what we'll often say are things like, oh, well, you know, they can't do an Excel sheet. They can do all those, they can Snapchat and they can do Instagram and they can do all those sorts of things. But the Snapchat and Instagram and things like that, they're things they're doing. The literacies are their ability to be able to curate, collate, problem solve, be what I call slip tasking and things like that. And I think part of the problem lies in the fact that we're not understanding the literacies that they have and drawing from them. We're seeing a lot of those literacies as the literacies that we define, as opposed to understanding what those literacies are and leveraging those. So perhaps a bit more controversy to add to your thoughts.
Right. I love it.
Jonathan, I know you obviously teach in this area as well. I wonder what your thoughts are here in terms of digital literacies for students. Do you think we harness these as well as schools?
I think Jonathan's just switching to his phone because he's having some technical issues. And because if you recall, he's actually, you know, at the train station.
He's zooming in from another, from outside the school. It's interesting because, you know, one of the things I found during my study in a school in Illawarra, and this is going back to my PhD study when I was looking at how early career teachers design technology integrated learning. One of the teachers who was perhaps less experienced as a teacher, she was in her first year of teaching, but she had a group of students who were very comfortable with the technologies they were using. And things like you were saying, Kimberly, though, they were using apps that they were very familiar with. They used them regularly. They were aware of all the affordances of these apps, and they had access to a class set of iPads as well. And it actually came to the point where students were working with the teacher to make recommendations about the design of that technology-enabled learning experience, because they were saying, well, you know, we could actually use this to do this. We understand what you'd want to do. How about we use Minecraft Education for this? So that's a really interesting perspective, and in that teacher not being the holder of all knowledge and all of that sort of thing, but actually engaging students in the design of the experience.
I think that's really interesting because I know, Lauren, I've got an example of that last year where we'd taken our iPads out to take photographs of some local council issues, and when we got back to the classroom, I was wondering, how do we best share these? And I said to the boys, like, what's the best way of us sharing these? And I was thinking, oh, they might screen mirror onto our whiteboard, or I wasn't sure. And one of the boys said, I think we should create pic collage posters and be able to then put those up around the school to raise everyone's awareness of some local council issues, which it was like, oh my gosh, that then got built into the program. And so all of the other classes then did that as well. And I think I often would have the students that I would call, and we've got those in any school, but who are very confident using technologies, who become like the consultants and can always help with other students.
have one of those at home, and he's very handy now he's 15, I have to say. Jonathan, welcome back.
Yeah, sorry, technology is failing me today.
Yes. But yeah, so we were just talking about students' digital literacies and how they develop them, and how perhaps they can be engaged more broadly in schools, and to bring in the literacies that they have that we perhaps don't even think about.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think that when we think about student natural abilities, and we think about the things that they bring, and I'm not going to use the word digital native because I still don't necessarily agree with the concept. But I do agree that over time they build skills and capabilities, and as we bring those skills and capabilities into lower year groups, they bring those to them in higher year groups with a deeper level of understanding. So we do a lot of work in our junior school, a phenomenal amount of work, to get students up to speed with their digital literacies. But by the time they get to senior school, they mightn't be coding, they might be writing apps, and that's completely fine. But what they understand are just general terminologies like UI, UX, and they know what those terminologies mean, so that when they turn around and in a school, you say, I want you to create a really good user interface for the way that's going to do X, Y, and Z. They understand what it is you're talking about, and that's not foreign literacy to them. And I think that's a really important concept, is that they're not lost on that. That literacy is not lost on them. We look around the school and the kids are making posters with Canva without our direction. And I think that's where we start crossing that divide between, we're getting them to make a poster in a classroom, and like Kimberly said, they're initiating that response themselves and saying, well, I already know that technology. What can I do next with that technology? And what other literacies do I need to know now to start expanding my capabilities and understanding? And so we start bringing in things like design sprint. We start bringing in, agile technologies, and expecting them to work with those kinds of agile technologies, so that when they do their own project management, when they do their own project work, they're already stepping up that game into a sort of almost like a work-ready experience.
So is the literacy then, the literacy that we're really looking at now, it goes because I think for a long time when it was all very new, we were thinking about literacies being something more like it's a skill, it's a thing that you can, these are wonderful literacies. But I think beyond that, really, where we should be at now is thinking about the fact that the literacies are our ability to expose them to a wide range of the right terminologies, the right tools and things like that, or where to go for the right tools and the right opportunities. But also it's really about being adaptable and being flexible themselves, and for us not having to, dare I say it as a teacher, but have full control over what they do. And ours is more about saying, we need you to create something that will represent this, or to problem solve this. And we can, it doesn't matter to us in many ways, the tool that they use. We might say, look, there are a few here that I can think of, like Pic Collage, like blah, 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 blah. But I think we've got to get away from the fact that if a student says, oh, well, no, because we don't know about it or we're not sure about it, and just go, okay, sure, it's due on Friday. I just need to be able to see it. You need to fulfill the brief of what we're doing. So for me, I think the literacies are really about leveraging their capabilities and enabling them to then take those capabilities to do the job that approach the task that they've been given, more than something very specific.
Yeah. So
yeah, look, I'll just jump in. Sorry, I'll just jump in really quickly and just say that, yes, and giving them that scope of practice is incredibly opportunistic for them and for us. I'm going to say it's come with a caveat, and I think that over time we've simplified down some of the tools to a point where students no longer understand some of the more, I would say, fringe technologies that we would consume as fringe technologies now that were probably core back when I was at school. So, things like Excel and databases and other stuff. So we're kind of expecting them to understand this whole digital literacy around data, but we're not teaching spreadsheets anymore. And I mean, I think there's a complex caveat there. We've lost that element of their digital literacies, and yet they're using some really powerful technologies that they're not really up to tune with, because some of those other things are just missing along the way. And I don't necessarily think there's an answer. I just think it's an interesting thing that has shifted, since we've simplified technologies and brought out a huge range of web applications that have provided alternative solutions.
Is it a bit like young people who have the mechanics of reading and they might be able to read the words really, really well, but they're not necessarily fully managing the comprehension? So, you know, some that can happen. Is it a little bit sort of like that?
Yeah, it's interesting, Matt, I'm wondering what you're thinking around this as well, because we are obviously hoping that teachers can provide the environment where this can actually happen. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so look, I agree with all of the things that people are pointing out and saying, and I'd like to sort of add some extra points to those. So I agree that often students develop great skills with technology that teachers don't have. Also like to point out that often that's despite the education system and the education that they're being provided, not at all because of it. There are phenomenal schools out there, and I think teachers from some phenomenal schools are present here today, and the sort of work that you're doing, we would hope could happen in every school. But there is tremendous variability out there in terms of infrastructure, facilities, opportunities, and probably most importantly, culture. And the culture of a school based on, you know, the leadership, the professional learning opportunities, and also, you know, the equipment and whatnot at their disposal varies greatly. And that vastly impacts on the sorts of opportunities that students have, and therefore the sorts of digital capabilities that they'll develop. So I think I agree that it's really complex, and I lament that we can't have all schools maybe with sort of Kimberly and Jonathan's opportunities, because yeah, it's obviously great what they're doing.
Agree.
Yeah, look, man, I know Kimberly, you're probably going to agree as well, and I'll just say one really quick thing. I think that we are in such a blessed position, and I think that comes with some incredible responsibilities, and I think that COVID highlighted that so dramatically for many of us, where my children were still at very well resourced schools that still couldn't provide the level of opportunity that others could. So I think that's a major thing's been highlighted.
So then, Matt, I'm going to come back to you, because if as teacher educators, perhaps we might have some way of influencing this process. What are your thoughts on that? Can we influence by engaging our pre-service teachers in education around this? Is that enough?
Oh, look, you know, and I suppose I'd want to say yes, we can, because that's my entire remit, or a huge part of my remit is to try and advance the capabilities of pre-service teachers, but also very much the confidence and beliefs of pre-service teachers about what can be done. I explicitly sort of build them up to say, you know, you will have skills that you can hopefully jump straight into schools with that teachers in schools haven't had time to learn. So you've got a big responsibility and a big opportunity there. And yeah, look, I definitely think it's, you know, we have to set them up with lifelong learning attitudes, because it's such a short amount of time that we have with them. And it's a really hard thing, because in many ways they come in as the least experienced teachers. So that agency to activate sort of change within schools is perhaps constrained. But sometimes they really do have fantastic ideas, and they need the encouragement to really sort of tactfully, but also, you know, hopefully with some volition, try and affect change in their schools. So if you have pre-service teachers coming through, you know, well, I had a PhD student, Kim Roaston, who did a very interesting study that showed even teachers with and there were career change teachers and had a lot of sort of capability and skills that they brought to bear, they could come into schools and do that prac and be quite discouraged because they weren't given the opportunities to apply their capabilities. So I think it's a really complex issue. It depends a lot on the school, and if you're in a school where you can encourage those pre-service teachers to experiment, that could go a long way.
I do have to note, Matt, that one of the participants in my PhD study was an early career teacher who had come through Macquarie, and he demonstrated immense intent and resilience in developing something that he was in a very low resource school. They had very little access to any digital devices, but his focus was on the pedagogical driver of collaboration. He wanted to create something where his Year 6 students were collaborating. So although it was perhaps in comparison to some other highly resourced schools, quite perhaps in terms of innovation, perhaps less or more primitive, what he did was actually create a wonderful learning experience for those students. And he constantly referred back to what he had learnt in his initial teacher education. So I think initial teacher education is really powerful. But as you say, it's what happens in that transition, perhaps, as they go into schools. And he didn't have support, so it's possible. The possibilities are there. Possibilities are there. Kimberly, what do you see many early career teachers coming to you, or prac students coming to you, who want to try innovative things?
Yeah, definitely. We actually have early career teachers working with us. Probably there'd be at least one early career teacher on each grade actually at the moment, someone within the first 5 years of their teaching. And one of the things that I think we do a lot, and I'm sure this is common in a lot of schools, is we have collaborative planning meetings where then teachers who are more confident in their use of technology or more knowledgeable about technology enhanced learning, they can then share that with the team, and then we'll team teach. So teachers who feel less confident can then put their hand up to say, look, can we do this together and collaboratively? And so that then upskills the other teachers who may not have the same confidence or level of experience in integrating technology as well. And that's working really well. And then we might have a spotlight in a staff meeting on someone's technology practice. So we've got a STEM teacher here who the other day used Mentimeter for the first time with some of her Year 4 students. And so that was an example of a spotlight. And I think sometimes that sort of ripple effect of once some people start using technology, then you really do have that then embraced by other teachers once they see the student engagement in the learning, but also that agency that people have been talking about.
Can I just say something there about that? Because I agree, Kimberly, I think it's fantastic, but I'm sort of thinking back to when we're not going to have that in every school, and I've taught in schools, and I'm sure we've all taught in schools where that's not possible, because and that's cultural and it might not happen. And I think that perhaps one of the things that I say is it's about finding the reason why you would want to do those sorts of things. Because when I was teaching in Canberra in the before 2000s, and I'm not going to tell you what year it was, but it was a while ago. And I had 33 children in my class. I was just at a local primary school, and we had no technology. I had one computer in the library with dial-up internet. And those of you who don't know what that is, it's very slow and it takes a long time. But because after that hot air balloon happened and I became sort of a little bit more, I suppose, aware of what technology could do. And I was able to connect with schools around the world. And I did some amazing things with those little children that took a lot of planning and a lot of time. And at one point, I actually got into trouble because I had a 15. Look it up if you want to know what a fax machine is, many of you. But it was because I believed that those small things could make a difference, again, to the learning, that connecting with children in other classes overseas. So I don't think it has to rely on, it's going to be better if you have great technology. It's going to be better if you have great cultural support. But I think if you don't, maybe one of the things that we need to be working on with our pre-service teachers and our early career teachers is their sense of agency and their developing ability as teachers and understanding why doing those things is important, and that you don't have to be you don't have to be pushing that whole big envelope and using the highest, most wonderful technologies in the world. The difference is that using or doing something could make and could bring for the children that you're working with. So I think that that's really important, because not everyone will have the support that we're talking about. I think that comes back to what Matt was saying too.
Absolutely, yeah. And I know we did have a question about initial teacher education, whether pre-service teachers do have education in this area, and they do. What I found in my PhD was that it varies between universities. Obviously, there are those of us here who work in that area in our respective universities. And the way that we kind of approach it is to think a bit, not to focus on technologies as a very technocentric approach. We try to think of it in terms of enabling the learning. What kind of pedagogical approaches can these technologies support? For example, collaboration or personalization of the learning. So we're thinking about it from a very pedagogical perspective, and that's how we generally approach the teaching in this area in initial teacher education. So I think you can have the confidence, hopefully, that students or early career teachers are coming out of university with that kind of experience, as far as I'm aware. And I know, Annie, you're in Notre Dame, which also has quite a strong focus on that area. And you also work, obviously, coming from Notre Dame, you're working with the Catholic system as well. And the Catholic system itself has a level of support beyond the school, doesn't it, for these types of practices?
Yeah, look, I think, again, these are practices that are part of culture, part of that whole sort of that wider community type of practice. But I think that also does exist in other schools, depending on how the networks work. And that's something that probably still varies a lot, like so many other things. But yeah, certainly where you have that cultural connectivity and that broader out of the silo of your own little school does make a big difference. But you can also, I think as teachers, it's really important for us to understand that if those things aren't available, that we can also do them. Many years ago, again in Canberra, I started with a group of other teachers. We used to have latte learning, and we'd just meet every couple of weeks on a Saturday and probably stay way too long and drink far too much coffee and eat too much cake. But nevertheless, we just get together, and there were no presentations. There was nothing formal. We'd get together and we'd just say, oh, here's something I tried this week and I did this. And build that culture ourselves and not rely on the fact that it is or isn't there. I sort of probably feel that's quite important for us to do as educators or as teachers, as professionals. Yeah.
To develop that professional learning network that is your support outside of the school as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kimberly and Jonathan, I'm going to come back to you just quickly. What do you think at a school at executive level we can do better to support teachers in their individual classrooms in implementing this kind of innovative learning, digitally enabled learning?
I'm really mindful of the different needs of teachers within our schools. So I'm really interested in how we can personalise professional learning for staff, as well as providing just-in-time support. And I think that's actually something that's really important. I've realised in recent conversations that we've got some staff, for example, who, we're working in professional learning groups at the moment, and people are creating surveys. And some people are really au fait with how to create a survey, and others, we didn't even know where to start. So there's a huge breadth in the same way in our classrooms, that need for differentiation. I think there's a real need for differentiation around how we can integrate technologies, and just that familiarity with different tools that we might be able to use with our students as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo that, but I'll also sort of step into a higher strategy level and say that I would strongly recommend policy and looking at what your school is going to be able to consider is their policy moving forward on technology integration, and how they're going to support people in their schools with training to achieve those outcomes. You know, we've worked really hard at Roberto, particularly to get a really strong policy in place for technology integration, for building good technological integrations, and we're working really hard on getting training instilled at a range of levels for teachers to be able to be really good at what they do with technology. But that's taken a long time, and I think that a lot of the time schools throw technology at teachers, and you know, teachers grab technologies and hope that they can learn and do their best with it without a lot of policy and a lot of guidance. And so I think, you know, by working with the executive team to develop a really good strategy around technology that can improve the implementation and the outcomes of those technologies, and of course the strategy behind what technologies you're going to bring into the school and how you can best support your teachers using the money that you've been afforded to spend on those technologies, because there's so much wastage on technologies, and we see, you know, things sit on shelves that don't get used because either there's not enough training or there's not enough opportunity. So I would strongly suggest policy and good policy on training.
And so policy can helps to shape the culture that follows.
Yeah. Yeah, it can help shape that culture, but it can also say to the staff, we really value technology and we value its integration, and this is how we're going to help you get there. You know, it's unfortunately what ends up happening then is we have hotspots of great technological use, and then we have cold spots where there's, you know, teachers who need so much more support and really do need more time. And that time can be afforded, but it really has to be afforded in a way that is going to meet their needs and meet the needs and the policies that the school is looking to try to, you know, all the outcomes, I suppose, they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I think that's really important. It's certainly something that's coming out in the research anyway, around the context to support teachers in integrating technology in their practice. I'm just mindful of the time, but I would like to ask everybody a final kind of bigger question, if you like. So Matt, I'm coming to you first, so just ready. I'd like to ask you what you'd like to see happen in terms of policy and practice across universities, schools and education departments to better support students and also teachers then to develop the digital skills they need.
Okay. So since you asked, I'd like to see a leveling of the playing field in terms of resourcing. I'd like to see that, and you know, it's definitely, this is not targeted in any way against, you know, private or Catholic school systems, but I would like to see public school systems brought to have equivalent resources so that teachers and students, no matter where you choose to go to school, you've got equal access and opportunity to an excellent and outstanding digital education. And I think until, I mean, as people have pointed out, there's a lot that we can achieve without, you know, high-end technologies, and you know, you don't need the actual best equipment, absolute best equipment. But similarly, there are so many times that I hear about people in public schools just not being able to access working equipment. And so I'd really like to see a concerted effort to provide the infrastructure as a starting point. And then I think it'll be much easier to have conversations about practice, professional learning, culture. Obviously, you know, that they need to all happen in sort of tandem, but that would be the greatest step up that I would like to see from both sides of politics at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Hear, hear. Thank you, Annie.
Sorry. Yeah, no, look, I agree. And I think it is really problematic. And when you think about, last year during COVID, some of our pre-service teachers had experiences in schools where, some of them were teaching via Zoom. They were teaching on Zoom via Zoom from their homes or wherever. And that was wonderful. And there were others of our other groups of pre-service teachers who were sitting in rooms on their own, cutting up pieces of paper and photocopying things and making packages to send home for children. And I think that whole notion of policy and, equity in a way, or equality, and all of those, because to some extent that often infers that we have to bring one down and bring one up. And I don't think we have to do that. But I think what we do have to do is provide the opportunities for all teachers and students in all schools to be able to do the things that make a difference and are possible. And I think that goes far beyond just purely the provision of technology. It's a much bigger issue than that. So, I don't know if we can fix that. I think we have to constantly question it. And I think we have to talk to the people who make the decisions about what's happening in our schools and actually raise it as an issue, a constant issue. Because nearly every morning when I listen to nearly every day, there's something about the schools and what's happening or not happening in them. So, we've got to be a voice.
Yeah, thanks, Annie. Kimberly, what are your thoughts?
Do you know what? I actually haven't really got anything more to add to what Matt and Annie have shared, because I mean, I recognise that there's a great deal of inequity, not only in this area, but across the school systems. And I mean, we need to work together. We need to support teachers across all systems. And I think it's a really critical issue. And we're all about to vote. So that's something that we're all going to be looking at, I'm sure.
Wish we were talking more about education in that. That's the only thing. Jonathan, final words from you.
Yeah, look, final words from I think that really this is an issue of time and training, and providing that opportunity for teachers to get their training, to get that opportunity to instill the ideas of technology, to strengthen technology in schools. So when students leave schools, they've got those basic technologies and they understand how to use them in their own learning and then in education more broadly. So I do agree with the others, equity and certainly, putting pressure on politicians to build equity and justice into our system so that there is greater access infrastructure, and affording that time and training for university graduates, for initial teacher education students, for early trained teachers, and for teachers that are transitioning into a new realm of technology to get that opportunity to really build their skills and enhance their confidence in using technology, and not just at the consequence of a global pandemic.
Thank you. Thanks, Jonathan. And thank you so much, everybody. We have just run out of time there. So I'm going to hand back over to Fred, and thank you for the contributions in the chat as well. Thank you, Fred.
Thank you, Lauren. On behalf of the Teachers Guild New South Wales Council, I'd like to thank our distinguished panel, Matt, Annie, Jonathan, and Kimberly and Lauren, for their time and dedication engaging us all on the very informative discussion in the opportunities and challenges on our important topic today. The Teachers Guild New South Wales thanks you for your friendship and congratulates you on the work you have been leading and making education the vibrant professional association that it is. Thank you. Just in terms of follow-up, the event recording will be sent out along with a certificate of attendance and a short post survey to help us shape our future monthly online webinars. Thank you for joining our event, and we look forward to see you at future Guild events. Please stay safe and well. Thank you.